The city does not sleep on Passover night. Jerusalem during Passover is a city that has swallowed itself whole. A population of maybe 30,000 people suddenly hosting upward of 100,000 pilgrims, all of them crammed into courtyards and rooftops and hired rooms on every street. The fires are still burning. The songs are still echoing down the stone alleyways. Somewhere in the upper city, a lamb bone sits picked clean on a table, and the smell of burnt offerings hangs over the whole valley like a second sky. It is into this city, this noise, this fire, this crush of human bodies and human need, that the Son of God has spent the last 3 years walking, teaching, healing, arguing with Pharisees in the temple courts, feeding crowds on hillsides, raising a man named Lazarus from the dead in a village 4 miles down the road. And now, on the last night of his life, he is walking away from it all. Not running, walking. Down the steps of the upper city, through the Kidron Valley, past the tomb-lined slopes that the historian Josephus tells us were so crowded with graves that pilgrims had to camp among the dead, up the low ridge of the Mount of Olives and into a garden at the base of the hill, a garden his disciples knew well. John tells us Jesus often went there, a familiar place, a quiet place. The garden is called Gethsemane, and before this night is over, Jesus will make a decision in this garden that no human being has ever been asked to make. He will make it on his knees, alone, in the dark, while his closest friends sleep 30 yards away. We think we know this story. Most of us have heard it since we were children. The garden, the prayer, the betrayal. We know the outline. But the outline is not the story. The story is what happened between the lines. The story is what the cup was. The story is what the word Abba means when you say it at the lowest moment of your life. The story is what it means that God, the God who made the stars, asked if there was another way. Stay with me, because what really happened in Gethsemane that night is more human, more terrifying, and more beautiful than anything you have been told.
The Last Supper ends somewhere around midnight. John's Gospel gives you the longest account of what Jesus said at that table, 5 full chapters of words spoken in a single evening. He washed their feet, he broke bread and said it was his body, he passed a cup and said it was his blood. He told them he was going away and they could not follow. He told them not to let their hearts be troubled. He told them he was the vine and they were the branches. He told them to love one another. And then he said this, "Get up, let us go from here." They did not understand, not fully. Peter had already promised to die for him. Thomas had already said he wanted to go wherever Jesus was going. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, the ones who had asked to sit at his right and left hand in the kingdom, they were there too, full of food, full of wine, full of confidence that whatever was coming, they could handle it. They could not handle it. The walk from the upper room to the garden takes roughly 20 minutes on foot, down through the Kidron Valley and up the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. Josephus describes this road in detail in his account of the Jewish wars, a road bordered by tombs on one side and the eastern wall of the temple on the other, a road that every pilgrim in Jerusalem walked at some point during Passover week. Jesus had walked it before. He knew every stone. He had also, John tells us, told Judas to do what he was going to do quickly. Judas was already leaving the table. He was already moving through the city with a plan and a price in his pocket. 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave under Mosaic law.
The clock was already running. At the garden, Jesus stops. He turns to 8 of the 11 remaining disciples and says simply, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." Then he takes Peter, James, and John deeper in. This is worth pausing on. Jesus had 12 disciples. One had already gone to betray him. Of the remaining 11, he leaves 8 at the entrance, and of the 3 he takes with him, the inner circle, the ones who had seen him transfigured on a mountain, the ones who had watched his face shine like the sun, they asked them to do one thing, just one: watch, stay awake, be here. That is all he asks. Now here is the first thing most people miss about this night. The name of the garden is not incidental. Gethsemane comes from 2 Hebrew words, gat, meaning press, and shemanim, meaning oils. It means literally olive press. It is the place where olives are crushed under a grinding stone until the oil runs out. Jesus chose this place. He had been coming here for weeks during his ministry in Jerusalem. He did not stumble into it by accident on the worst night of his life. He walked deliberately to the place named for crushing. And then, with Peter and James and John standing 3 feet behind him, he said the most unguarded words in all of Scripture: "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Not troubled, not heavy, to the point of death. The Greek word Matthew uses is perilupos, sorrowful all around, sorrowful on every side, like a man standing in a field where every direction is grief. There is no way to look that is not pain. He asked them to keep watch, and then he went a little further, fell on his face, and began to pray.
He does not begin with majesty. He does not begin with a theological statement. He begins with one word: Abba. Mark's gospel preserves this word in the original Aramaic, the only gospel that does. Every other gospel translates it into Greek, but Mark keeps the raw word, the actual sound that came out of Jesus' mouth in the dark. Abba. You need to understand what this word is. In 1st century Aramaic, Abba was not a formal term. It was not the word you used in a synagogue prayer or in a legal document. It was the word a small child used for their father. It was the word you said when you were hurt or scared or lost. It was the word that assumed closeness, that assumed you would be heard. It sits somewhere between daddy and papa in its emotional register, tender, immediate, urgent. This is the word the Son of God uses when he is lying face down in a garden, sweating and shaking at midnight with soldiers coming. Abba, Father. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. And then, almost in the same breath, nevertheless, not my will, but yours. That word, nevertheless, is doing enormous work in that sentence. It is the hinge point of the entire prayer. It is the moment where one will bends to another, and it is not effortless. It is not peaceful. It costs something enormous to say that word. You can feel the cost in every syllable. But what is the cup? Most of us have heard the cup described as death, and that is partly true. Jesus was hours from crucifixion, one of the most brutal forms of execution the ancient world produced. But the cup in Jewish prophetic tradition meant something more specific than physical death. In Psalm 75, in Isaiah 51, in Ezekiel 23, the cup is the vessel of divine wrath. It is the accumulated weight of human sin poured out and handed to the one who must drink it.
It is not just suffering. It is the full absorption of everything wrong with the world, every act of cruelty, every lie, every betrayal, every wound human beings have ever inflicted on each other and on God, all of it at once on one man. That is what is in the cup, and Jesus is asking if there is another road. The Greek word is paralkomai. Let it pass alongside me. Pass alongside. Not disappear, not cancel. Just, is there a road that goes around this? Is there another way? He gets up, walks back to where he left Peter, James, and John, and they are asleep. Not distracted, not praying poorly, asleep. Luke, the physician, adds a detail here that the other gospel writers omit, that they were sleeping because of grief. Their grief had exhausted them, which is, if you think about it, one of the most human things in the entire Bible. These men loved Jesus. They had given up their livelihoods, their families, their futures to follow him, and on the worst night of his life, their love could not keep their eyes open. Jesus looks at Peter, the same Peter who 4 hours ago had said he would die before he denied him, and Jesus says gently, "Could you not keep watch for 1 hour?" He does not yell. He does not accuse. He says 1 hour, as if that was all he was asking for, as if he had lowered the expectation as far as it would go. Then he goes back and prays again.
The second prayer is recorded differently in Matthew than the first. The first prayer asked if the cup could pass. The second prayer says, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." The wording has shifted. The first prayer explored the possibility of another road. The second prayer acknowledges that the road is this one. There is a movement happening here, a slow and terrible movement from question to surrender. And it is not happening easily. It is not happening with serenity. It is happening the way a man drowning claws toward the surface, with everything he has in the direction he must go. Here is what most people miss about the Garden of Gethsemane. We often read this scene as the moment before the suffering begins. We think of the cross as the place where Jesus endured, and the garden as the place where he prepared, but that is not accurate. The garden is not the waiting room. The garden is the arena. Luke chapter 22, verse 44 tells us something that no other gospel records. He writes that Jesus was in agonia, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. That word, agonia, we get our word agony from it, but the modern word has lost most of its original power. In the Greek athletic world, agonia was the term used for the final struggle of a wrestler, the moment when the match is still undecided, when both men are on the ground, when one will win and one will not, and neither knows yet which one he is. It was the word for maximum physical and mental exertion toward a single decisive outcome. Jesus in the garden is in agonia, and his sweat becomes like drops of blood. Medical literature has documented this phenomenon. It is called hematrosis, and while it is rare, it is real. Aristotle mentioned it in his writings. The physician Frederick Zugibe, who served as chief medical examiner for Rockland County, New York, and spent years studying the physiology of crucifixion, documented cases where extreme psychological distress caused the capillaries feeding the sweat glands to rupture, mixing blood into the sweat. The skin becomes extraordinarily sensitive afterward, hypersensitive to touch. This is what the soldiers will reach out and grab in a matter of hours. But in this moment, this is the body of a man under a weight that has no parallel in human experience. This is not symbolic anguish. This is not literary embellishment. Luke was a physician. He noticed what physicians notice. He recorded what he saw in the testimony of those who were there. And what he saw was a man so overwhelmed that his body was breaking down before the cross ever touched him. And then, Luke tells us, an angel came. This is one of the strangest verses in the New Testament. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Think about what that means. The eternal Son of God, through whom all things were created, the one who spoke the worlds into existence, the one before whom the angels fall face down in worship, needed strengthening, was strengthened by one of his own created beings. This is not a verse that a theologian invents. This is not a verse designed to make Jesus look powerful. This is a verse that makes Jesus human, desperately human. And that, of course, is exactly the point. He needed help. He received help. And then he got up and prayed a third time. This is not a story about weakness. This is a story about what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, not the absence of need, but the decision to go forward anyway, with shaking hands, with a body that is already bleeding, asking for and receiving help along the way. He returns to the disciples. They are asleep again. This time, he does not ask them a question. He just looks at them. And then he says, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come." The hour has come, not arrived, come, as in it came to him, as in he is the one it was always coming for.
No one recorded the third prayer. Matthew tells us Jesus went away and prayed a third time, saying the same words, but he does not give us the words. Mark says the same, a third time, praying. Luke has already moved on to the angel and the sweat. John does not record the prayers at all. We do not know what Jesus said in his third prayer. We only know that when it was over, he stood up, and something had been decided. This is the moment, not the cross itself, not the nails through the wrists, not the hours of suffocation on the wood, not the spear in his side. This is the moment the cross became inevitable, because Jesus said yes to it. Here, in the dark, on his knees, in a garden named for crushing, with blood drying on his face, and 3 sleeping friends 30 yards behind him, and an army of soldiers minutes away, he said yes. Not because he had to. You have to understand this, and this is the part that changes everything. Jesus was not trapped. He was not a man caught in circumstances larger than himself, simply making the best of a bad situation. He told his disciples weeks earlier, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord." He told Peter in the very next minutes, when Peter would pull out a sword to fight, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? 12 legions, 72,000 angels, the armies of heaven waiting on a word." He did not say the word. He said a different word. He said yes. And then he walked back to where Peter and James and John were sleeping, and he did not wake them in anger. He woke them gently. "Rise, let us go. The one who is to hand me over is near." He could see the lights already, torches moving through the trees at the edge of the garden. In John's account, it is a considerable force, a detachment of Roman soldiers with officers of the chief priests and the Pharisees. They are carrying lanterns. They are carrying weapons. They are led by a man with a plan, Judas Iscariot, who knows this garden because Jesus brought him here. And here is where this night ends in a way that no story has any right to end this way. Jesus walks toward them, not away, toward. He steps out of the shadow of the olive trees, and he says, John records this, "Who is it you are looking for?" As if he does not know, as if he is giving them the chance to say it out loud. They say, "Jesus of Nazareth." He says, "I am he." And John records something remarkable here, that when Jesus said those words, the crowd drew back and fell to the ground. Roman soldiers, temple guards, armed men, they fell down, not because of a weapon or a display of force, because of the weight of two words spoken by the man who was about to let them arrest him. I am. The same words God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, the same words Jesus had used in the temple courts to claim eternal existence. Two words that carry the full freight of divine identity, spoken in a garden at midnight to the men who came to kill him. He identifies himself. He lets them recover. He asks them to let his disciples go, and then he goes with them. Earlier that night, Josephus tells us in his account of Jerusalem's geography, the road from the Kidron Valley was visible from the temple walls. If any of the priests were watching from the parapets of the city, they would have seen a line of torches moving down from the garden toward the city, moving deliberately, not fleeing, not being dragged, walking. Eusebius, writing in his ecclesiastical history 3 centuries later, records that the Jewish Christians of the early church preserved Gethsemane as a sacred site, that they kept returning to that specific ground, those specific olive trees, as a place of prayer and remembrance. They knew what had happened there. They understood, in a way we sometimes forget, that the real battle was not at Calvary. It was here, in the garden, in the dark, in the third prayer. The cross was the finish line. Gethsemane was the starting blocks. Before the soldiers came, before the torches appeared through the trees, before any of it, Jesus prayed 3 times. He sweat blood. He asked if there was another road. He received help from an angel, and still the weight did not lift. And then he said, yes. Here is what I want you to carry out of this garden with you. The first thing is this. Gethsemane proves that Jesus was not performing. This was not theater. The struggle was real. The fear was real. The sweat that turned to blood was not metaphor. He was fully God, and the theologians will argue about how to hold that alongside what happened in the garden, and they are right to argue, because it is not simple. But he was also fully human, and that night his humanity was on full display. He did not want to die. He asked if he could not die. He needed an angel to help him stand up under the weight of what was coming, and none of that diminishes him. It magnifies him, because it means he was not acting brave. He was choosing brave every single minute, which is the only kind of bravery that has ever mattered. The second thing is this. The disciples failed him completely. The 3 men he most trusted, Peter, James, John, could not stay awake for 1 hour. They slept through the most important night in human history. They failed the simplest request Jesus ever made, and he went to the cross for them anyway. He did not wait for them to get it right. He did not require them to prove they deserved it. He looked at their sleeping faces, and he went anyway. He goes for you the same way. Not because you earned it, not because you stayed awake, not because your faith was steady when his was being tested. He goes because that is what he decided, alone, in a garden, in the dark, before you ever had a chance to fail him or impress him. And the third thing, the one I want you to sit with,
The most important prayer Jesus ever prayed was not answered the way he asked. He asked for another road. There was no other road. He asked for the cup to pass. The cup did not pass. He prayed 3 times, with blood on his face, with everything he had, and the answer was no. And the world was saved because of it. Which means that somewhere, in a hospital room, in a marriage that is ending, in a career that collapsed, in a grief that has no bottom, somewhere there is a prayer that God is not answering the way you asked. And I am not going to tell you that is easy. I am not going to tell you it does not hurt. Jesus himself shows you that it hurts. But I am going to tell you this. The God who said no to his own Son in Gethsemane was not absent, was not careless, was not cruel. He was doing something that could not be done any other way. And on the other side of that no was the resurrection. The garden was not the end of the story. It never is.